digital assets, on-premise, cloud, your huge customer-facing assets. Why I'm saying so, post-pandemic, if you see, it's all about digital transformation. When you talk about digital transformation, cloud and API becomes a fundamental two building blocks. Without cloud and without APIs, the digital transformation perhaps is not the digital transformation. And you talk about the digital transformation, the authentication plays an extremely important role. It's very simple to sort of think, oh, is that so? What's new? Samir Naya kya bata raha hai? But trust me, the attacks have moved to a very different level. And in the days to come, with large language models and AI/ML, the attack vectors will become more sophisticated, more targeted, and more complex. So having a very strong and a layers of authentication form factor, static, a combination of dynamic, at a regular journey in your access will be a fantastic measure in the years to come. To give you a simple example, today most of the banks only provide a customer ID and a password. Yes or no? Yes or no? Right. So once you log on, when you want to transact, then there is a two-factor authentication which is kicking up. Today, the fraudsters have started to use bots which will read the user ID password, or they will capture it using social engineering tactics like phishing, vishing. They launch the bots. They will not launch the bots on your setup or your application, but also launch the bot on all third-party where the access is directed. Second example, take an example of a cloud applications accessed by, for example, your third-party vendors. Right? So during the entire process of access, hitting on a web server, going to an application, going to a database, and then the internal complete down the pipeline infra setup. Probably today, where is the two-factor authentication is only at the toll gate. The first gate will put it up, that's it. After that, it's absolutely a plain journey. To my mind, in the days to come, people will rethink and reimagine about the way the authentication mechanisms needs to be deployed. In that context, the behavioral-based authentication also plays an extremely important role. Because today, trust me, the entire banking industry is grappling about social engineering attacks. As the financial inclusion is happening with semi-urban and rural people, in the days to come, such credential theft or account takeovers will increase. Today also, from regulatory perspective, account takeover or social engineering attacks on your customer is a number one attack vector. Is a number one giant killer which is affecting the trust and reputation of the institutions. So if a customer wants to onboard, there has to be a digital trust. And the digital trust is getting eroded because these credentials are misused. And honestly, there is no solution, a silver bullet for social engineering attacks. Okay? So somewhere the thought process will evolve to using a cognitive factor or cognitive features in the form of a behavioral biometric whereby even though your credentials are compromised and the people have access to your credentials, they want to access the applications, the behavior will be captured. So that's one area which will pick up substantially. Third point, which is coming directly from the expectations of board and also regulator, is about continuous validation of your security controls. So the CISO or a cybersecurity practitioners will say that, okay, this control is implemented, that control is implemented, which is fine. The question is how the controls undergo continuous validations and testing to make sure that there is an efficacy about every deployment. So in this point, having a very strong red teaming, which not only uses the techniques to hit the IT infrastructure, but also who acts like a white hat hackers and accessing your applications is becoming a very prominent element. Today, most of us has the red teaming, or we outsource the red teaming services from third-party companies, which is absolutely fine. But in the days to come, this may become one of the focused areas as the organization is growing. Because if you see some of the research reports, it is clearly mentioned that many matured organizations have implemented security solutions to 70% of its ability. So still 30% is the gap which is available in the security solutions. And we generally remain comfortable and rely on the audit team to find out the gaps, because there is a policy which is developed on cybersecurity and InfoSec. There is a technology team implement that policy, and there is an audit team to validate the first line and the second line. But using technologically, proactively, something like active defense, how proactively use a breach attack simulation mechanisms and red teaming to try to identify the vulnerability by wearing a hat of a hacker, that area is going to be very, very prominent in the next few years. Apart from these 3 years, of course, I'm not going into the details of the regulatory requirements like DPDPs and the clouds and API, because perhaps you would have heard that in the last 1.5 days about how APIs are shaping up. But yes, one important point on APIs, this is all about open banking. All about open banking. Today, on an average, every bank is connected to 50 to 60 partners using APIs. So for a fraudster to target a specific institutions, he need not to target directly, but he can route it through the third-party vendors. So third-party vendors, especially the fintechs, where the connection happens primarily through API mechanisms, is going to be very, very critical. So security of APIs is another most important strategic area which will pick up big way in the bank. How again you use not only the governance on the APIs, but also the AML abilities to find out the behavioral into any API access, whether you publisher or API or a consumer or API. In both the areas, the behavioral aspects will play, in my understanding, a very big role. And the connected part, which will pick up, or a trend which is shaping up now, is third parties. Today, all of us know, when somebody talks about a third-party risk management, our focus is third-party audits. Yes or no? Making sense? So third-party audit is the primary mechanisms to get a comfort about how my data is secure with third parties, and in turn update to the board, to IT strategy committee of the board, or to information security committee, or to an investor. But because the fraudsters knows that if I want to hack or target institutions, simple mechanisms also target X, Y partners, because they process huge data of this organization. So how to make sure that we have visibility over my data residing at the third parties all the time? I think that is the area which is also evolving rapidly. There are multiple third-party rating service provider which will monitor the third-party rating, etc. There is attack surface monitoring which is coming up in a big way as one of the most important element in this part, where at least you know that I don't have vulnerabilities on my internet attack posture. But when the data is residing with the third-party vendors, how do you make sure that that data remains safe and I have visibility over the data all the time? That's one of the most important area which will come up. And there are good security solutions and companies and startups coming up in that sense. Of course, it requires a lot of collaboration, engagement, and liaison with the third-party vendor, because it's not easy that they will give you access to or the access rights or access permission. The fifth and the last area, to my understanding, is about the identity fabric. Today, with the footprints residing in a data center in clouds, the complexity has increased. Today, earlier I used to manage only a data center, 5,000, 4,000 applications, the infrastructure servers, 100, 500 applications. Today, the perimeter is vast. Practically, the identity has become a new perimeter because, and the data center and the server side, the footprints are scattered. They're fragmented. So how do we create an identity fabric? By connecting these dots of the assets and manage the identities effectively, because even today, 80% of the attacks in cloud happens with misconfiguration. At least to best of my understanding, right? So identity management, not only on the data center, but also on the cloud, and having a visibility over the entire identity lifecycle and access management lifecycle all the time, right? Which is also a slightly a part of the surface monitoring, I would say attack surface monitoring or a continuous visibility. That is something area which will shape, because as the quantum comes up, and the AIML is becoming a new normal in certain sense, and the large language models will be used. So when you're using it ethically, somebody is going to use unethically, right? So in that, all such eras, having a continuous visibility or your control compliance, your identity posture, security posture of your servers, your applications, will drive the adoption in the coming days. So there are some of the thoughts which I believe could shape up the years to come, at least next 3, 4, 5 years down the line. Of course, it's a evolving journey for all of us. Nobody's perfect in that sense. That's how I think is going to be the areas which will shape up the cybersecurity industry. Thank you very much. Enjoy. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Samir. Can we have again a big round of applause for that address? Well, I'm sure that your insights has added a lot of value to why we are here today. And now with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's time we move forward. We now have 2 track sessions curated for you all. Our first track session is the board and security governance. I would urge our track session members to join us on stage. And post our track sessions, we have a panel discussion curated for you all, which will begin sharp at 4 o'clock. So I would urge you all to please join us back for further segments and panel discussion. Well, over to our members to take it ahead. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us. We have a really interesting panel discussion lined up on board and security governance. I'll invite the panelists over now. We have Mr. Ramchandra Kulkarni, who looks at the technology risk division at Goldman Sachs. Mr. Ramchandra, if you could join us on stage. We also have Mr. Animesh Chauhan, who is the district manager for financial services at Palo Alto Networks. We have Mr. Samir Aksekar, who's the cybersecurity director at the EQT Group. Mr. Steve D'Souza, who is the Chief Risk Officer for ICICI Bank, and Mr. Shiv Kumar Pandey, who's the Group CISO for Adani Group. Thank you to all the panelists for joining us for this discussion. Mr. Ramchandra, over to you.
Thank you. Is it audible? I'm not there, but I'm here, so I don't see my photograph there. Interesting slot after the lunch with a board session, and this is probably going to be one of the few sessions where AI will not be spoken much, so we'll see how it goes. Couple of things in terms of introduction, what we will talk today in terms of how, I think we have heard Samir speak just a few minutes back in terms of the complexity of the new risks that are emerging and how do organizations deal with it. And when we are looking at technology cycles, what used to be 7, 8, maybe in certain cases 10 years of technology generation has now become 3 to 5 years. So in terms of your adaptability, your speed with which you need to respond to changes, that has changed again. So in that context, keeping up with the whole technology landscape, the associated risks becomes an increasing challenge for all the firms. And obviously, as an oversight, the board becomes an important factor for the board of directors as well. So in terms of this particular session, we are going to be talking about a few things which are responsibilities of the board, what typically works, what are the effective things, and I have my colleagues here who will shed light on some of those things. While there is no specific in terms of regulation, cyber security regulation in financial services, but there is obviously when we start a bit earlier in 2000s, we have an IT Act, and then we have sectoral
integrating with other tools, and then achieving this kind of thing. Another example I'll quickly give if time permits.
So with that bit of
let's say this
context,
again, taking example of internet-facing
have my first
applications.
question to my
Okay,
colleagues
as per
here.
the policy, all of these have to be behind WAF, and the
board
WAF
member
is supposed to do
responsibility.
automatic
There are
scanning.
essentially three things
Right.
that
So the
happen.
most
One
basic
is
automation we can do is,
understand, so how do board
figure
members
out, generate
understand
reports on a daily
what is
basis, or
relevant,
generate
what
on the
is,
dashboards that whether
the regulatory
all
landscape,
these applications
what
behind
you
the
need to do,
WAF
and how do we
are
equip yourself. That is the
having any open
understand part.
vulnerabilities or not, and then the rest of the process. But my question here is, that is one part of it. If there are 5 applications which are configured behind the WAF, what if you have actually 7 applications which are exposed to internet? It could be UAT, you never know. Like it could be for testing purpose, somebody might have exposed to the internet, you never know. Now, as part of the automation journey towards compliance, we must integrate that with the inventory that you have. And assuming that the inventory is updated and that reflects that these are the 7 internet-facing applications, you highlight, what are the difference, how many applications are integrated or put behind WAF and how many are not. So that's delta. Again, taking a step forward is whether there were exceptions taken, let's say for half an hour, 30 minutes, 1 day, whether there is an appropriate exception taken, then it's again a low compliance risk. So again, I'm not mixing here the security risk and the compliance risk. We have to be compliant with what processes that we are defined. Okay, it does not mean that we eliminate security, but we need to treat that risk appropriately. As long as we treat the risk, we are compliant, right? So I think it's the journey towards the compliance that we need to automate. And that will require a lot of efforts and understanding of how different processes within the organizations are working, and what are the tools that we have in the organization, and what is that other tool that we can bring in that can actually, be a focal point and integrate all these. And
here I have one point. Do we see now automation leading towards the platformization of technology? Because we have different tools and technologies in place which in bits and pieces managing the compliances or leading towards compliances. Integration among those tools and technologies, I would say pertinent if we want to achieve the final outcome. So is it a kind of a direction that things are taking towards platformization of security that typically we call?
It will, again from compliance point of view, it will certainly help because you have lesser discrete technologies to manage. They all talk the same language, okay, same whatever identifiers of the risk and parameters. So it will be much easier to manage, and it will be much easier to act on certain outputs generated from those platforms. But again, invariably, we kind of look at, when we talk about automating, we talk about automating the technical aspects. Right, so be it SOAR or some kind of automation, you automatically go and disable that port or disable that user. So these are all technical aspects. We still need to focus on the broader issues of compliance where the process itself is bypassed. So for example, I said that you have a WAF working beautifully, but then you don't have an application which is behind WAF. Now that's the lapse in the process. Somebody has not put it behind that. Now we need something, that will identify these kind of gaps which will lead to the process gap and help us correct or improvise what caused that, right? Identify that and take a immediate action and be compliant. Again, going back to that, I mentioned about concurrent audit. So it's like, we need to do this as frequently as possible, as feasible, I would say. It might be like every minute, or it could be real time, or it could be on a daily basis, or even monthly basis, depending on what parameter of compliance or what parameter of the area that we are monitoring. So whatever is feasible, practically doable, and makes sense, we need to define the frequency, but do it on a periodic basis, not at the time of your compliance check, which happens, let's say, once in a year or once in a quarter. Because then by that time, you would have already non-complied with some of the item. And justify, you're trying to justify, those lapses. So,
For sure, actually. And so broadly, it has to cover the complete value chain of the compliance, internal to external. And when we say compliance, it's not just coming in from a regulator, actually. What you want to achieve, how you want to strengthen the security, this is actually going to be considered as the compliance, not just what is coming in from the regulator. And only then you will be able to protect the infrastructure, the data and everything. I'll move, with the same question, I'll move to Mr. Venugopal on this. We are talking about the experiences, and if you can also share how you have been managing this as of now and the way forward for this.
Right. Yeah, so we typically automate something, and there are two possible, challenges. One, of course, the complexity. Wherever there is a complex, we'll try to automate it so that the complexity can be reduced. And wherever the priority, from a risk standpoint, wherever the indicators are more, probably a backdrop also I need to tell. When it comes to RBI, there are certain, requests coming in like a KRA, right? We need to keep on demonstrating the key risk indicators or key performance indicators of our security controls. So that has to be done on a certain, submissions have to be done on a quarterly basis, certain submissions on a monthly basis, certain things are ad hoc basis, right? Some of the, on-demand based requests also coming in. Now, earlier days, if you know the history, RBI or any regulator for that matter, they are more or less binary in nature. If a design control is there, for example, if you have an antivirus, that's fine, right? Or if you have a WAF, that is good enough. Or if you don't have a WAF, that will be a negative remark on your performance, or KRA, right? Now, it is more of an operationalized. They will say, okay, how much percentage of systems have an antivirus or EDR implemented? And what is the percentage of vulnerabilities, critical vulnerabilities are open for beyond 6 months, right? They're getting into more of an operational in nature. And whenever we get into operations, it's not just the technology which is helping you or a one-time solutions. You also need to demonstrate process, right? A maturity need to be demonstrated over a period of time. And if regulators see certain dip in your performance, definitely they will actually ask you to increase their assessment. They can even penalize you, right? So that's how the regulations are going in, and that's how it has been framing up. So for me, when I'm choosing an area for automation in compliance, I'll take these two areas. One, the complexity, the more complex calculations. For example, recently there is a RBI incident response guideline, which has been revised from the last year, 2021 to 2023, or 2022 to 23, there is a variation, where they are actually asking us to report certain unusual cyber incidents. And one such requirement is for the technical decline reporting, right? In case if the bank has certain technical decline of, let's say, their UPI transactions or IMPS transactions, RTGS transactions, so we need to report it. Now, it is more of a performance-based. So, and there is also criteria which says that 3% of the transactions in a day is failed, you need to immediately inform RBI. Now that requires a tremendous amount of calculation, logics, automation, and a synthetic monitoring from an end user standpoint. It's not just some server going down or some service getting conged off or something, right? We have to measure from the end user perspective, which means from an outside in view for the service need to be brought in. So that requires a tremendous amount of operation. So those areas where the complexity is high, we will try to automate. And wherever there is a priority areas, like some of the hygienic controls like patch management, vulnerability management, those areas will be picked up and will be automated. So these are two strategies which typically I take.
See, regulation perspective, again, what is coming in from regulators, because most of the time compliance, even if we are treating like internal things as well, but most of the time things we consider like what regulators are giving to us. Again, the scenario which is changing is, and even what we were proposing to regulators is following the risk-based approach. That means what is, I'll say, high risk element for me could, there is a possibility it would not be for you, right? So there is a different graded mechanism that has to be followed for different organizations to sort of address those risks. But when we talk about that, that again changes the complexity at the provider's level. Like one tool, which is probably automated my part of the business from the compliance perspective, it might not be relevant for other business because the complexity is different, and risk-based approach, which I am talking about, that is going to change a lot of scenarios for a different the business model for that matter. Like something which is relevant for bank, which could become very complex for a medium or a small scale entity, right? Because the complexity is not that high, the kind of infrastructure that they are managing is not that complex, and so on and so forth. From cost perspective, that might not solve the things. That is something which is to be solved by, again, the providers, the innovators, and the startups. How are they going to sort of solve that thing with the technological solutions? And as Mr. Deval and Mr. Venugopal said, like things are like in pieces. We have to address those requirements, and then we have to see the complete value chain as well, right? WAF is one element, but then we have to see what other things are required so that we'll have a very comprehensive view around that particular compliance requirement. This is going to be different from a smaller entity. So how this is being managed and how this kind of things are taking shape. And as you are coming from the privacy background, I'll request if you can pick up that thread from privacy point of view, and if you can take up some of the examples, because that's going to change a lot of, that's going to be very different for different entities. Large, say, significant data fiduciary, and even the data processor, and all those things, if you see, is going to change significantly in terms of requirement and in terms of gamut, how things can be managed from that side.
Right. So yeah, we believe that to enable automation and be compliant with, let's say, privacy bills, first we need to solve the problem of systematization, about understanding of two things: expectations from the compliance and how techs are enabling it. As you might see, there are a plethora of companies around. Each is trying to solve some problem in privacy or in compliance. But one problem which is very evident, particularly in data privacy, is there is no proper link between expected compliance and what a tech is offering. Let's imagine a case. We are buying a product from a supermarket, Bonvita. It has ingredients, right? How about having a privacy note in a product which gives a tick, okay, this meets this requirement, and this requirement. So we need to create a very strong framework which binds legal compliance and technology, and we can connect the dots. That's one aspect. Touching the privacy part again, the consent plays a very strong role in data privacy. And automation can come into picture for a data fiduciary or a data consuming company, which is custodian of the data, only if we can understand how consent can be binded with compute. Right now, consent mechanism is very blanket. I will take a consent today that I will use the data for this purpose, and I might be cross-selling it, and there is no way involved right now to prove that I never copied your data, never cross-sold it. There's no way. So we need to bind that the consent should be purpose-driven. I will take consent only for this particular purpose. If we can crack that, then the compliance and automation will be a very easy path to take. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible. So the innovations are happening around where you can bind your consent for computation to a certain purpose. Let's say I'm taking your bank statement to give you a loan. I will just take consent that I can compute your credit, debit, and some other parameters. Nothing else. I will have zero visibility on your data. If you can crack that technologically, then the whole path is very easy to enable lots of automations and compliance. And that's where I believe that we need a trustless compute and consent binding purpose, which will solve the whole problem in a much more better way.
Sure, thanks. Can I have mic?
My say regarding the compliance, or to be precise, regarding the risk management approach, when you go ahead and see all the frameworks from the ISO side now are attached to directly to risk management. There is a special section which we go ahead and have in that. Now, as we see, we move towards 31,000 framework ISO. We always go ahead and do a risk profiling based on probably quality, occupational health, probably other areas of environment management system. You talk about information security, you talk about service management system. You go ahead and ahead, you see in BCMS, every ISO is now aligned to those particular 11 areas. Now, in such cases, when you go ahead and do that particular risk analysis or risk profiling, and then you go ahead and have your risk assessment completed with the risk treatment plan, there are certain risks which is still in these kind of frameworks which are acceptable in such a way that if it is a risk which cannot be mitigated, that has to be accepted by the management. Now management accepts it and sit on top of it. Now how do you go ahead and foresee that the regulatory bodies have to go ahead and make a mandate of certain particular controls? Even if the risk is being accepted, that has to have an action plan to be remediated within a specific time frame. It cannot be a residual risk altogether. So that is a challenge with compliance. I will come to my second question after this, another risk in automation. So if you can put some light on this area, that would be great.
So, very valid concern. Yes, management approves the and accepts the risk, but it has to be for a finite time, finite period, which has to be logical. It has to be supported by certain factors, either external dependency or internal dependency. The regulator, and we are again talking from the banking perspective, the regulator will certainly review all the exceptions that have been provided and the open items, and they will certainly put it in the RMP, the risk management plan, at the end of the annual audit, and they will put a mandate on that. They will define the timeline. Fine, it is the risk that is accepted by the management, but you cannot live with this risk for long. Right, so the regulator steps in at that time, and they define a timeline. They give a target date, and then the organization has to sort of comply with that. So that actually that's how it is treated.
So you
right?
feel like that yes, regulators need to go ahead and mandate on certain controls that cannot be a overriding risk all across the life of the project or the life of a company. It has to be remediated at any point in time, right? Regulations should be in such a way that certain controls are mandatory.
Those controls are mandatory. Those are by the compliance guidelines. But then it is, and that's why I said, there are some internal policies, right? For how many days you keep your critical vulnerability open, or for how many days you continue using XP, an outdated system, right? Your internal policies says that this is the risk that we identified and we accept for a certain period of time, and within which we'll remediate that. And there is an action plan supporting that same statement. Then the regulator at that point in time, at the initial audit, they may accept it and permit you some time to complete.
Time to remediate it.
Yeah.
So now coming to the second. Yeah.
Sorry, just a tail end to that particular piece of information. A control exists if there is a risk. If there is no risk, doesn't have, you don't have to have that control, right? That's what SOA or those sort of framework will essentially say. So regulators also understand that. And if they see a risk, and if the management had taken a compensatory measure, and of course, the ultimate residue, it has not brought down to a low risk, but it has been considerably reduced it, but manageable. They will actually look at the risk management framework and how the risk has been addressed to the board and how the board has taken that decisions, what parameters they have considered, it will be taken note. And until it is, the risk has been gone into an acceptable risk, they will monitor that as well in their regulatory, audits.
Perfectly
all
all right.
that.
So this is from the regulator perspective, like SEBI's recent cybersecurity guidelines, right? In that, they are asking to report, and then they are asking within, I think, 15 days, if I remember it correctly, within 15 days, you have to provide the remediation report as well.
Exactly.
So even
For
at
certain
that,
it is 45, right?
yeah. So even at that level, they are monitoring that, and that's not. And what I remember, there's no criteria as is defined that this is like non-mitigable risk. So
That particular attack which can be generated, which is new in type, and if it is not then in database, it will pass through, right? So it is still in the reactive wave. What is your viewpoint on this kind of an automation? How much helpful? Only it will be saving time, I accept, but then in the future, attack will still go in. So what do you see as an automation? Is it that is the way to only save time, but is it the proper way to go ahead and make sure that we are curbing or we are stopping that particular attack to happen?
So again, now I would say if you, since you refer to the title.
It's a risk.
Yeah, since you refer to the title of this panel discussion, it's about compliance. It's not about attack and the
so
resulting
it's risk.
See, non-compliance is always a risk. Okay, but this particular, let's say, your entire question ended with, there might be still some attacks, that might get unnoticed and all that. So that's a different thing. Whether we are compliant with our own processes, have we been following what we have defined, what we feel is, this is how we should be functioning, this is how our products, tools should be functioning, this is how our people should be functioning, this is how they should be reacting to certain anomalies or alerts. Whether the entire process is, we are compliant with our internal processes or not. That is the first thing the regulator will check, whether you are compliant with your own processes or not. Forget about the external factors, but your own processes that you have defined, whether you are following that. I'll give an example. Please give me, because this is a very relevant example about, let's say, attack. So firewall management, the firewall admin person, let's say, make some 5 changes in a day. It could be delete, create, modify rules and all that. Now, how do we verify those rules changes at the end of the day, at the end of the week, a month, or at the time of just before the audit, whether there are any redundant rules, zero-hit rules, which are still lying around in the firewall, and we clean up. So if we have a tool or a set of tool, it's actually a platform that we can integrate, and we can see that at the end of the day, there were 5 rules were changed, created, or modified, or deleted. Whether there is a corresponding change request that exists in your change management system or not. Okay. If yes, are there any high-risk tools? Like, for example, certain ports, Telnet 23 has been opened. Now, whether there is a corresponding exception report or exception approval, which lies in the exception management system. Now again, for these to happen, it is assumed that, we have a proper change management system, we have a proper exception management system, and people are following those. They are not taking shortcuts, मैं शाम को डालूंगा, या मैं बाद में कर दूंगा, अभी मैं बाहर हूँ. Whether these are already populated and flowing through the system or not, and then only the action has been taken on the firewall or not. So that is where the compliance gap will emerge. And as part of the concurrent audit, you will, if not immediately, but at the end of the day or next day morning, you will have that report in place that these are the non-compliant actions.
So the maker-checker arrangement still remains.
Yeah, maker-checker is one part of it. I'm saying the processes that we have defined, change management, exception management, the risky one has to be, go through the exception management. So these are all linking together, which is a difficult task.
How do you qualify AI from a assessor's point of view or from maybe a compliance point of view, that whatever automatically a change has been brought in for blocking probably a specific port, IP, and that qualifies for a human job which requires change, exception. That means we need a complete service management suite before even we go ahead and implement an AI, so that a change can be reviewed at the end of the day by a human who can go ahead and qualify whether it was right or not. That has to be still checked, right? Which is what you are again taking. So I was coming back to the maker-checker arrangement portion only, and this risk, when you are implementing an AI tool or automation is the way what we are talking about, this risk will still remain and the human factor will not go out, as far as I understand. What is your point?
Can we take it offline, because time is, yeah, if you can just answer to all.
Again, see, we are talking about automating the compliance process. Okay. Now, AI certainly will automate things, help automate, but there are human minds that can think beyond AI, because AI is something, that is programmed or that is learned from, what we have fed into it. It depends on, what is the data that is working on and all that. So again, you cannot completely rely on AI-based, let's say, compliance automation tools and say that, we are compliant. We have to have that human element in place overseeing that.
Yeah. Just one, sorry, if I may. Just my sort of feedback on that particular question. Obviously, it's a very apt question in terms of the use of AI and how the compliance view it or how the risk is viewed it, right? So obviously, when it comes to use of any such solutions or tools, risk assessment on AI itself is required. The models which has been taken, how it is learning which data it is being picked up and learning and all. Is it within the contained environment or is it outside the perimeter of its learning fences? So those risk assessment have to be done. But in case if that outcome, right, it is more of an unknown stage or unknown kind of a risk, then definitely from a management standpoint, we should not, allow it, or we should use it for the less risky areas like certain repeated tasks or fundamental decision-making processes. So risk management on AI is also one of the requirements which we need to satisfy before compliance when we are using such tools. And nowadays, boards also are very cautious. Like whenever we say that, okay, the solutions having these kind of functionalities, they're asking how do you do the risk assessment, shows the report, have you factored what learnings have been done, or is there a false positive, or is it having any negative impact in terms of, like we do have certain privacy issues from certain tools and all. So they actually get into that level of detail and then certify. In case if they're not happy or they're not satisfied, they will not let us implement those things.
Hi, I have a very simple question. As an in-house lawyer, I've spent hours, doing redundant job, which can be easily automated. It's important. I'm talking about larger chunks like employment, labor, where a lot of compliance work goes. But again, now I'm working with a tool where we are automating privacy compliances. We're trying to make privacy easy for everyone. So I had one question, just a thought here. So do you think automation will kind of change perspective of how business leaders look at compliance? Because I've had a senior C-level leadership tell me that, Yashu, our product is semi-compliant, it's okay, we can make it work. But then do you think, of course, because automation will also bring in costs, it will increase efficiency. So what do you think the perspective of business leaders would change at all with respect to compliance as a burden right now, how it is looked at?
I think compliance is not a compliance, right?
Exactly, that's what I said as a lawyer.
So compliance is certainly, we as practitioners, we feel it as a burden, but then that's something that we have to bear that burden. And that's in the interest of the organization. From the top management or the senior leaders, I think automation will bring in more transparency. It will leave that room for, either intentional or unintentional omissions. And it'll be more upfront, it'll surface the issues in a more timely manner, so that the management can take appropriate calls on that, rather than being on the other side, like being non-compliant in the eyes of the regulator. It will give them an opportunity. If I am having it's simple, like health issue, your health checkups and all that. So if the doctor tells you have this problem, it's better get it. Okay, you get it revalidated. You go to another, you take another opinion and all that. But it better do it rather than somebody telling you that no, you are fit and fine. You don't have to do anything. So I think automation will not be biased. Of course, it has to be programmed, it has to be integrated properly. The report generation has to be perfect. Okay, it has to be continuously tuned and see whether the report shows all fine, or there is an issue in the reporting mechanism itself. What parameters you have set in the reporting, what frequency you have set in the reporting. So there are a lot of things, but certainly automation will help. Management will like it because it is not. Somewhere in the back of mind, they might say, this report might be, manipulated or massaged, or, some certain facts are not being brought to their notice. And I think from a good governance point of view, management will certainly like that transparency so that they can act on time.
So I think so sometimes that partial management of compliance and all, that won't be addressable because you have to justify what is reasonable for you. If you justify what is reasonable for you and you are compliant, whether it's automated or manual, irrespective of that, only then you will be able to justify that, yeah, I have taken my effort to be compliant. Else you will be liable under that, under that regulation. Second thing is, in terms of when we are leveraging AI, how are we going to address those risks? Probably that will fall under the risk-based approach that overall organization is considering, right? When you are adopting any tool, even if it is a compliance tool or a security tool, that has to fall under that risk-based approach. If there is any risk, you have to assess, and accordingly you need to sort of deploy that. And from compliance, overall compliance perspective, I think this emerging tech, not just AI and all, from Indian companies perspective, I can give you a number actually. Almost 80% of these companies are leveraging AI, ML and all those emerging tech as core of their products. What's helping them actually is to be swift. They're consistent. I'll say they'll cover a larger gamut so that it will create more comprehensive view at organization level to be compliant. When you are, and it is also adding to your I will say ability to demonstrate your compliance, right? This is also a need of compliance, regulations. So this is going to address from that perspective, and definitely the cost and all those aspects that will be addressed through this. It will also remove that overlap which is coming in from different regulations. Good thing is different regulators are coming up with a lot of consultations and all. Because of that, up to certain extent, we are reducing that overlap, but still it's there, right?
Atul, sorry, we are losing
Okay,
time. Please,
sure.
we need to close.
Yeah. So because of that, sorry. With this automation will reduce that I'll say the overlap, and because of that the overburden on the organizations, and definitely it's going to add to the overall margins of the organizations at the end of the benefit of the client. So with this we'll stop, and just to summarize, the overall complexity and the comprehensiveness, consistency and the accuracy, real-time management and real-time reporting kind of requirements which are coming in, effectiveness and the cost effectiveness, it's definitely going to be added a lot of value because of this automation probably, and all the regulations are going to give a lot of opportunities to our innovators and the researchers to solve those challenges and come up with the solutions. So with this we'll stop, and probably we'll have more such sessions coming up in future. So hope to see more automation in the domain of compliance. So thanks to everyone for joining us, and thanks to our speakers for joining for this sessions. Thank you.